Hello, how are you? Welcome back. I've missed you. I hope life is treating you lovely. Let's get into the video topic for today. But before we do that, my name's Claude Massey. I'm living in Tel Aviv, Israel. I've been living here for 13 plus years, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. So the first thing I want to declare to everybody is this is not a global perspective I can come from. I've only lived in a few different countries, and I'm not sure where you're thinking about moving to Israel from. So there is a chance that everything I'm saying in this video does not apply to you and your reality. However, I believe it does. To begin with, we shall speak briefly about the idea of the cost of rent in Israel. The entire video is going to be about the cost of living in Israel, so we might as well start with the rent, right? That being said, if you look anywhere on the internet, the city of Tel Aviv, where I live, is actually the most expensive city to live in the world. This is a fact. You can Google it. You can find out on your own. So if you're planning on moving to Israel, you better understand that you're about to move to a very expensive country, number one. But if you're planning on moving to Tel Aviv, you're thinking about moving to the most expensive city in the world. Now, if you're not, if you're planning on moving to a different part of the country, that makes complete sense to me. It's completely possible. And I do want you to know that the further from the center of the country you get, the more reasonable the cost of rent is. Now, if you're thinking about renting anywhere in Israel, I recommend a website. It's called Yad Shtaim in Hebrew, or YAD2.co.il. Go to this website, use your Google Translate, and you can look around the country to see various rent rates. Of course, keep in mind of what I just said. You might be shocked. You might faint from the prices, or you might not, depending on where you're coming from. That said, and coming from the United States, the cost of rent is very, very expensive. Be prepared. Probably gonna blow your mind. Now, since we're talking about the cost of living in Israel, and we've covered rent, you're going to need to eat. You're going to need to put food into your stomach. So let's talk very briefly about the cost of food. Now, I do have to admit to you, the cost of food in Israel is extremely expensive. You better be prepared to spend a lot of money on food and a lot of money on rent. So far, that's 2 out of 2 that I have to tell you are very expensive. A perfect example would be the cost of a can of soda. In the United States, you can get a can of soda for about $1, $1 US. In Israel, the same can of soda is going to cost you $3. So that just gives you a roundabout perspective that all of the food in Israel, as compared to living in the United States, as compared to the cost of food in the United States, is about 300% more expensive. And this is across the board. Perhaps another example could be McDonald's. Everything at McDonald's is 3 times as expensive. Most everything you want to eat is going to be 3 times as expensive if you're coming from the United States. Yes, unfortunately, it's true. The cost of living in Israel is extremely high, and therefore, the cost of food is as well. But I don't want to scare you. I don't want to terrify you. You're going to need to wear clothes. And if we're talking about the cost of living in Israel, let's talk about the cost of clothing. And I do have good news for you, because the cost of clothing in Israel is reasonable. It's not crazy. It's not overly expensive. So you can afford to put clothes on your back. However, the quality of clothes is varying from country to country. And in Israel, compared to the United States, overall, the quality of the clothing that you're going to find in stores is much, much lower. Be prepared for that. The reason for this, I have no clue whatsoever, but it's absolutely true. the quality of the clothing in Israel compared to the United States and compared to Europe is much, much lower. However, the cost of the clothing itself is completely reasonable. Moving forward in our video about the cost of living in Israel, some of you who are watching this video have children. You're thinking about moving to Israel with your family, your wife, your kids, and it makes complete sense. So I have to touch the topic of the cost of school in Israel, the cost of education. Because although the government says the cost of education is free, meaning you can send your kids to school for free, there are a lot of fees involved. And the cost, for example, of putting a child into daycare is extremely expensive. And once your child hits primary school, which would be anything really from grade 1 to grade 12, right? The cost is still high. There are monthly fees that you have to pay to send your child to public school, which is quote unquote free. So if you have children and you want to get them educated, of course you do, be prepared for the cost of school. Research it online. Understand that it does vary in price according to which city in Israel you're living in. And yes, there is a cost to receiving education in Israel. So we're talking about the cost of living in Israel, right? And you're thinking that perhaps you want to get an automobile. You want to own a car. You want to get around by your own volition without taking public transportation. By the way, public transportation in Israel is really good, but you might need a car. I want you to know that the cost of having a car is incredibly expensive. You want to plan on paying 300%, whatever the rates are in US, if you're moving here from the United States of America. Most people see having a car as a luxury in Israel, and it's a luxury item. And with luxury comes cost, comes expense. So you're talking about the cost of gas being very high, the cost of automobile insurance being very high, and of course the cost of actually purchasing a car. So all of these things are expensive, and I'm sorry, most of this video is telling you that things are expensive, and you will have to learn how to deal with that in Israel. Don't get me wrong, you can enjoy your life. I want you to enjoy your life. The blessings of life are plentiful, but if you're moving to Israel, plan on a more expensive lifestyle. Okay? That being said, please hit the thumbs up button. Leave your comments and your thoughts down below. Don't be afraid to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.